Before the world makes its demands, before memories surface and roles are assumed, there is a quiet moment where you meet yourself. In that moment, the words you choose to speak inwardly begin to shape the entire day. Most people underestimate this inner dialogue, yet it is here that habits are formed, fears are reinforced, and identity is quietly negotiated. We often search outside for direction, motivation, or validation, while ignoring the voice that follows us everywhere. The mind listens even when we are not aware of it. Every thought repeated becomes a belief, and every belief slowly becomes a way of living. If you do not choose what to tell yourself, the unconscious will choose for you, based on past experiences and unresolved emotions. This speech is not about positive thinking or forced optimism. It is about conscious self-conversation, the kind that brings clarity instead of comfort. These are not words to escape reality, but words to face it with awareness, honesty, and inner strength. When spoken daily, they do not change life overnight, but they change how you meet life, and that changes everything. Telling yourself that you are responsible for your inner world is one of the most powerful psychological shifts a person can make, because it moves you from unconscious reaction to conscious choice. Responsibility here does not mean self-blame or harsh judgment. It means ownership of what happens inside you regardless of what happens outside you. Many people live as if their emotions are controlled by other people, past experiences, or current circumstances. And while these influences are real, the suffering deepens when the inner world is handed over to them. When you accept responsibility for your inner world, you begin to see that feelings, thoughts, and reactions are responses, not commands. This awareness creates a small but vital space between stimulus and response, and in that space lies freedom. The inner world is made of beliefs, memories, fears, desires, and unmet needs, most of which operate below conscious awareness. When you refuse responsibility, these forces rule silently, shaping your behavior through patterns you do not understand. You may repeat the same conflicts, feel the same emotional pain, or sabotage opportunities while believing life is against you. Responsibility brings these unconscious elements into the light. It allows you to ask, not why is this happening to me, but what is this revealing within me? That question shifts you from victimhood to insight. Taking responsibility does not deny pain, injustice, or trauma. It acknowledges that while you may not have chosen what happened to you, you can choose how it lives inside you. Unprocessed experiences do not disappear. They express themselves through anxiety, defensiveness, resentment, or emotional numbness. When you claim responsibility, you stop waiting for the world to change so that you can feel better and begin the inner work of understanding, healing, and integration. This is where real strength develops. Responsibility for the inner world also restores personal power. When emotions are blamed on others, you become dependent on their behavior for your peace. When you recognize that emotions arise within you, they become signals rather than threats. Anger can point to violated boundaries, fear to unmet security, sadness to unacknowledged loss. Each emotion becomes information, guiding self-understanding rather than something to suppress or project. This daily reminder also builds psychological maturity. A mature psyche does not seek constant comfort, it seeks truth. Growth often requires facing discomfort, uncertainty, and inner conflict. Responsibility prepares you for this process because it encourages curiosity instead of avoidance. Over time, you begin to notice that life challenges lose their grip, not because they stop occurring, but because you are no longer internally fragmented by them. When you tell yourself daily that your inner world is your responsibility, you slowly reclaim authorship over your life. You stop living as a reaction to the past or to others' expectations and begin shaping your inner landscape with awareness, honesty, and courage. This shift does not happen instantly. but with repetition it transforms how you experience yourself and the world around you. Telling yourself that not everything within you needs to be pleasant to be valuable is an invitation to psychological wholeness rather than inner conflict. From early life, many people learn to divide themselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts. They welcome qualities that are praised, such as kindness, strength, or intelligence, while pushing away fear, envy, anger, or vulnerability. These rejected aspects do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious where they continue to influence behavior in distorted ways. The more intensely they are denied, the more power they gain over thoughts, reactions, and relationships. Unpleasant emotions are often signals carrying important information. Anger can reveal crossed boundaries. Fear can indicate unresolved insecurity. Jealousy may point toward unacknowledged desire or unmet potential. When these feelings are labeled as bad or shameful, they are suppressed rather than understood. Suppression creates inner tension, and that tension seeks expression often through sudden emotional outbursts, self-sabotage, or projection onto others. By accepting that these inner experiences have value, you begin to listen rather than fight. This listening weakens their destructive expression. There is a natural human tendency to build an ideal image of the self and then attempt to live up to it. This image becomes a mask worn to gain approval and avoid rejection. While it may function socially, it fractures the psyche internally because it demands the exile of anything that contradicts the ideal. Self-acceptance does not mean acting out every impulse. It means recognizing their existence without denial. Once acknowledged, these impulses can be transformed, integrated, or consciously restrained rather than unconsciously enacted. Many people fear that accepting darker or uncomfortable parts will make them worse. In reality, the opposite occurs. What is brought into awareness becomes subject to choice. What remains hidden governs behavior without permission. Inner honesty creates self-regulation, while denial fuels compulsion. By admitting fear, you gain courage. By admitting weakness, you discover strength. By admitting resentment, you open the door to forgiveness. Integration leads to balance, not chaos. This daily reminder also cultivates compassion toward others. When you recognize your own inner contradictions, you become less rigid in judging those of others. You understand that human behavior often reflects inner struggles rather than moral failure. This understanding does not excuse harmful actions, but it replaces simplistic judgment with psychological insight. Relationships deepen when people feel seen rather than categorized. Accepting all inner parts is a long and often uncomfortable process because it challenges long-held identities and defense mechanisms. It requires patience and courage to sit with emotions without rushing to fix, escape, or justify them. Over time, however, this practice reduces inner conflict. The energy once spent on repression becomes available for creativity, clarity, and authentic expression. When you tell yourself each day that every part of you has value, you move toward inner unity. You no longer wage war against yourself. You become someone who can hold complexity without collapsing into shame or superiority. This wholeness creates a quiet strength that is not dependent on approval because it is rooted in self-understanding and inner truth. Telling yourself that growth feels uncomfortable before it feels liberating prepares the mind for transformation rather than resistance. Many people desire change but instinctively avoid the very sensations that signal growth. Discomfort is often interpreted as failure, danger, or proof that something is wrong. Yet psychologically, it is the threshold between the familiar and the unknown. The psyche naturally clings to what is known even when it is limiting because familiarity provides a sense of safety. When you remind yourself that unease is part of expansion, you stop retreating at the moment. Progress begins. True growth requires the dissolution of old structures within the mind. Beliefs, identities, and habits that once protected you may no longer serve who you are becoming. Letting them go creates inner tension because the ego resists losing control. This tension can appear as self-doubt, anxiety, or confusion. If you mistake these sensations for signs that you should stop, you remain confined to outdated patterns. Understanding discomfort as a natural stage allows you to endure it with curiosity rather than fear. Liberation does not arrive suddenly. It emerges gradually as the psyche reorganizes itself. Each time you face discomfort consciously, you strengthen your capacity to tolerate uncertainty. This capacity is essential because meaningful change rarely offers immediate reassurance. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action, it is the result of repeated movement through uncertainty. When you act despite discomfort, you teach the mind that fear does not equal danger, and this lesson weakens its grip. Avoidance of discomfort often disguises itself as patience or rational caution, but beneath it lies the desire to remain unchanged. The mind creates convincing stories to justify delay, yet growth demands engagement, not perfect conditions. By telling yourself daily that unease is expected, you interrupt these narratives and take responsibility for your development. This does not mean forcing yourself recklessly. It means recognizing the difference between genuine intuition and fear of transformation. Discomfort also reveals where inner work is required. Emotional reactions that feel intense or overwhelming often point to unresolved material within the unconscious. Rather than suppressing or escaping these feelings, you can observe them and ask what they are attempting to protect or communicate. In doing so, discomfort becomes a guide rather than an obstacle. It leads you toward greater self-understanding and integration. Over time, repeated exposure to manageable discomfort expands psychological resilience. What once felt unbearable becomes tolerable, and what once felt frightening becomes familiar. This expansion does not eliminate fear, but changes your relationship to it. You no longer organize your life around avoiding pain, but around pursuing meaning. The psyche becomes flexible, adaptive, and capable of growth, rather than rigid and defensive. When you remind yourself that discomfort precedes liberation, you remain present during the most critical moments of change. You stop expecting transformation to feel pleasant and start valuing its depth. This mindset allows growth to complete its process instead of being abandoned midway. It is through staying with discomfort that the psyche reorganizes itself and freedom slowly replaces fear. Telling yourself that patterns repeat until they are understood changes how you interpret life experiences. Instead of seeing recurring challenges as bad luck, punishment, or fate, you begin to view them as messages seeking consciousness. The psyche learns through repetition. When something remains unconscious, it returns in different forms, relationships, situations, emotional reactions until its meaning is recognized. This repetition is not cruelty, it is persistence of the inner world attempting to be known. Many people unknowingly recreate familiar emotional environments from their past. This may involve choosing similar partners, encountering the same conflicts, or feeling the same emotional wounds again and again. These patterns are driven by unresolved experiences that continue to shape perception and behavior beneath awareness. The mind gravitates toward what feels familiar, even when it is painful because familiarity feels predictable. Understanding this removes the mystery of why certain situations seem to follow you wherever you go. When a pattern repeats, it offers an opportunity rather than a sentence. The opportunity lies in observing your reactions rather than blaming external circumstances. Each repetition highlights a specific belief, fear, or unmet need, asking for recognition. If you respond unconsciously, the cycle continues. If you pause and reflect, the pattern begins to lose its grip. Awareness weakens repetition because the psyche no longer needs to create the same experience to gain attention. Avoidance is one of the main reasons patterns persist. When discomfort arises, many people distract, suppress, or rationalize instead of exploring its source. Yet what is avoided does not dissolve, it waits. Repeated situations often intensify over time because the unconscious increases the pressure until consciousness responds. By telling yourself daily that repetition signals something to be understood, you reduce fear and increase curiosity. This curiosity opens the door to insight. Breaking patterns does not require controlling others or changing external circumstances. It requires altering your internal response. When awareness enters a familiar situation, you gain the freedom to choose differently. Even small shifts in perception can disrupt long-standing cycles. You may notice a boundary that was never set, an emotion that was never expressed, or a belief that no longer feels true. These realizations mark the beginning of psychological change. Patterns also reveal personal growth when they appear in subtler forms. A challenge may return, but with less intensity, showing that integration is occurring. This indicates that the psyche is reorganizing rather than repeating blindly. Progress is not measured by the absence of challenges, but by increased consciousness within them. Each repetition becomes shorter, weaker, or more manageable as understanding deepens. When you remind yourself that life repeats lessons until they are learned, you stop feeling targeted by circumstances. You become an active participant in your own development. Experiences no longer happen to you, they happen for your awareness. This shift transforms frustration into insight and struggle into meaning, allowing growth to replace repetition through conscious understanding. Telling yourself that you are not what happened to you, but what you choose to become in response to it, separates identity from experience. Many people unconsciously fuse their sense of self with past events, especially painful ones. Trauma, failure, rejection, or loss can quietly become the lens through which life is interpreted. When this happens, the past does not remain in memory. It lives in the present, shaping reactions, expectations, and self-worth. Recognizing this distinction is essential for psychological freedom. Experiences leave emotional imprints, but they are not the essence of who you are. The psyche records events as symbols, emotions, and narratives, and when these are not processed, they solidify into identity statements such as, "I am broken," "I am unlovable," or "I always fail." These conclusions feel true because they are emotionally charged, yet they are interpretations, not facts. When you remind yourself daily that you are defined by response rather than event, you loosen the grip of these narratives. Choice does not mean denying pain or pretending strength. It means engaging consciously with what occurred instead of allowing it to dictate your future automatically. When painful experiences remain unexamined, they repeat themselves through self-sabotage, avoidance, or hypervigilance. By choosing to reflect, feel, and understand, you transform experience into insight. This transformation is what gives suffering meaning rather than allowing it to remain a source of limitation. Identity shaped by response is dynamic rather than fixed. Each challenge presents an opportunity to develop qualities that did not exist before, such as resilience, empathy, discernment, or inner strength. These qualities cannot be gained through comfort. They emerge through conscious engagement with difficulty. When you respond thoughtfully rather than react automatically, you begin to author your own character. Many people fear that releasing identification with past pain means invalidating what they endured. In truth, it honors it. Carrying pain as identity keeps you trapped in it. Transforming pain into wisdom allows it to serve a purpose beyond survival. The psyche seeks meaning, and when meaning is found, healing accelerates. The event remains part of your story, but it no longer writes the ending. This daily reminder also prevents future experiences from defining you prematurely. Not every failure needs to become a label, and not every rejection needs to become a verdict. By focusing on response, you maintain flexibility. You remain capable of growth even when outcomes are unfavorable. This flexibility is a sign of psychological maturity. Over time, choosing your response reshapes the inner world. Memories lose their emotional charge because they are no longer threats to identity. They become sources of understanding rather than wounds. This shift does not erase the past, but integrates it into a broader sense of self that is resilient, adaptive, and conscious. When you tell yourself daily that you are shaped by response rather than circumstance, you reclaim authorship over your life. You stop reliving the past unconsciously and start using it consciously as material for growth, self-knowledge, and inner freedom. Telling yourself that comparison disconnects you from your own path is a reminder to return inward rather than measure yourself outwardly. The psyche develops according to its own rhythm, yet comparison imposes external standards that distort this natural process. When you constantly evaluate yourself against others, you begin to live through borrowed criteria of success, worth, and progress. This creates inner conflict because your authentic direction is replaced by expectations that may not align with your nature. Comparison often arises from unconscious insecurity rather than genuine inspiration. It focuses attention on what appears lacking rather than what is emerging. This focus weakens self-trust and fragments identity because you begin to value yourself conditionally based on performance, visibility, or approval. The inner voice becomes critical instead of curious, and growth becomes a race rather than a process. Understanding this allows you to recognize comparison as a signal to reconnect with yourself rather than as motivation. Each individual carries a unique psychological pattern shaped by temperament, experience, and potential. No two paths unfold in the same way or at the same pace. When you compare timelines, achievements, or abilities, you ignore this individuality and impose uniform expectations on a diverse inner world. This leads to frustration, self-doubt, and the feeling of being behind, even when meaningful progress is occurring beneath the surface. True development is often invisible and cannot be measured through external markers. Comparison also feeds the illusion that others possess clarity, confidence, or fulfillment while you struggle. In reality, everyone carries unseen conflicts and uncertainties. The mind selectively compares your internal experience with others' external appearance, which creates a distorted perception of reality. This distortion deepens dissatisfaction and pulls attention away from inner work, which is the true source of fulfillment. When you disengage from comparison,